You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, it's so good to be back with you all again. You're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I'm your host, Steve Adams of Mighty Blue. And you found episode number 370 today, and our main guest on the show is Jim LePage, or Grey Ghost. Jim, unlike me, is a real outdoorsman who, as you'll hear, owns a camp in Maine with a direct view of Katahdin. He sent some pictures, and they are spectacular. But he also hiked the AT in 2018, so he's on here to tell us about that. Jim will be on in a moment. Then we're catching up with three of our Mighty Blue class of 2023. First up, we've got a very emotional Jessica Lang-Wright. When I tell you that Jessica has had a few incidents so far, that just doesn't do it justice. She's had a couple of real tests of her nerve, and you'll hear the tension in her voice as she recounts her adventure thus far. We'll speak with Jessica after Jim. On the other hand, Ron Ward is going along nicely. He's had a few knee issues to contend with, but he takes it all as part of the deal. Ron will be on after Jessica. Then finally today, another starter. You've only heard once from Joanne Flagg until today. She's a flip-flopper, and she's just started from Harper's Ferry. We're going to hear her early take on the trail. Finally today, George Stefanos is about 2/3 of the way to Katahdin. He's run into one of those guys you meet from time to time out there. Any life in general, I suppose. He's the kind of guy who claims to have walked 45 miles with a 70-pound pack and lied about pretty much everything. Fortunately, these guys are few and far between, but they're out there. And just before we get on, last week I mentioned that I was hiking about 4 or 5 days after trail days this year. I'll be podcasting from the trail, and I will share it with you if I think it's worthwhile. But what I wanted to tell you was something I'm quite excited about. I've decided to try out a hammock for the first time, with no tent as a backup. Paul Collins, or Skunk Ape, who hosts another of our podcasts on the network, the Hammock Hangers podcast, well, Paul is going to put together what he thinks will be a good setup for me. So I'll also report about how I get on with that. Should be fun. So let's get going and meet Jim LePage, or Grey Ghost. And this week, we have a guest who hiked the AT back in 2018, which is not that long ago, but it seems like a long time ago. This is Jim LePage. Hey, Jim, thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure to be here.
Well, you're nearly my vintage. You're a little younger than I am, I understand. Have you always been an outdoors guy?
Yes, I have. Yeah, ever since I was very small, grew up in rural Maine, so spent most of my time outdoors growing up. That was my playground for sure.
Yeah, it's hardly optional up there. You've got to do it, haven't you? You've got to be outdoors in Maine.
Yeah.
I mean, I can recall going through Maine with my hiking pal in 2014, and those amazing lakes, and there's no houses around them. It's just incredible to see. And you worked at Grafton Notch State Park. What were you doing there?
I was part of a state program called Cedar in the day, and just as a senior in high school, I did my summer up there with the park ranger called Bob Kuhn, and I learned a lot from him and did a lot of trail work on the park trails.
All right, nice.
Climb spec. We actually had to repair a cable in the day on the tower. I remember one. And it was a totally different trail going up then. It was called Blue Trail. They moved the trail in the late 70s.
So did you come into contact with the Appalachian Trail as a youngster then?
Yeah, I had actually got into the Appalachian Trail when I climbed Katahdin when I was 14. That was, I think last time we spoke a little bit, I met a man at the top that had just finished the hike, and he was 60. And I remember thinking, oh my God, how did a guy that old finish the trail? You know? And I think that was the start.
We feel his pain.
Yeah. And I started, of course, on my birthday when I turned 61. So it brought back memories seeing him at the top. Not many people hike the mountain back or hike the trail, the entire trail back in 71. So I would say, it was a pleasure to meet that guy up there.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. And did that kind of plant a seed in your mind that this was something you'd like to do at the time?
It did. Yeah, it did for sure. It made me want to do it when I at some point in my life.
So what was it? What was it about the trail that was it, or was it meeting that guy that made you think this is something that's really attractive thing to do?
Yeah, I think, a lot of time passed. I've always done a lot of hiking, but mostly day stuff, not stringing weeks upon weeks or days upon days. I used to go back to the park for a week every year, but it was that, and I think a long career starting at a young age, and deciding that I really did want to have that adventure, that journey, about the time I was getting ready to retire.
And that never dulled. Does it? It's funny actually because you'd think not so much you grow out of it, but you know what I mean though. Life does not get in the way, but life happens to people. And I know you said you married quite young, you were raising a family and so on, and you were working all the time. So did you ever consider going when you were younger?
No, I really didn't. I think it was always sitting in the back of my mind, but I got married at 19, my oldest daughter was born when I just turned 20, and then I had
Right.
two more after that. So I had a family. My wife and it'll be 47 years this year that we've been married. So it was, it took me a long time before I felt like I was gonna create the time. I really was very selfish from the perspective of creating the time to do the hike when I did.
I think that's an important thing for people to know, don't you? That you need. We're going to talk about the family support later, but you do have to recognise to do this hike successfully, it is a selfish endeavour. It's something that's not for anybody else other than you, and people either buy into that or they don't, and. Because you leave people behind at home to do things you would otherwise be doing, so it's kind of thing you do. So, but you told me when we spoke before that you were a president of a company in Michigan, and you moved there, and your wife stayed home. So you've had some separation in the past anyway. Was that for an extensive period of time? What were you actually doing? What was your business?
It was in the fly fishing business, and it was manufacturing. I was running an acquisition that we had made from kind of the mothership here in Vermont, and literally, I lived there for 4 years. Debbie stayed in Vermont. I moved out there, and it was 9 months later when I got back home that I left for the trail. So, again, that selfish side comes through after being gone that long, to then tell her that I was going to hike the trail was.
And you said that you were willing to retire to actually do this. So you weren't actually planning on retiring necessarily, or did you feel this was your time that you had to start doing it now?
I had, I think I had done most of everything I wanted to do with the company I was with, and I had brought some really good people up in the organization and felt like I was leaving on the best terms that I could leave on. But as I told you, the ownership really wanted me to stay part of the business, and were extremely gracious and kind of affording me the time to do the trail and other things for that matter, until 2020, so 2 years after I did the trail.
Wow. So they gave you a sabbatical to do the trail, carried on paying you. Happy days.
They did, and it was.
That don't happen all the time.
No, it doesn't.
And I know that you have a bit of a grandstand view of Katahdin, don't you? Tell us about your camp.
I have a fantastic camp on a lake called Caribou Lake. It actually is adjacent to Chesuncook, which is the third largest water body in the state. And Mount Katahdin is it is there in front of my camp every single morning that I wake up. I just got back from there this past Sunday, and every morning I look, or every night when I watch the sunset, I look at Mount Katahdin. It's an incredible sight.
And this camp has no power,
no power,
running water,
no running water.
And you spend about 3.5 months a year there hunting and fishing, I presume.
I do. I spend 3.5 months, and last weekend my wife went up with me. We snowmobiled up, actually adjacent to the park to the east, all the way to the north end, and back down. So it was beautiful, beautiful riding.
So how do you get there? You have to snowmobile in, or can you boat
Yeah,
in?
from
What do
my
you do?
camp, I can leave and there's some small trails to take, but they connect to a larger trail system of trails that you can take that go all the way up alongside. You can actually snowmobile a little bit in the park these days
Nice.
too. So
Nice.
I actually came out Togue Pond Gatehouse when I was coming out.
So excuse my ignorance on this. What is a camp? What do you have there? What do you got?
It's 16 by 24 without my porch. I have a porch that I put on that's 9 by 12, but it's a open single floor, 5 huge windows, so it's pretty much all windows. And then it has a loft with 5 or 6 beds, an outhouse, and a shed. That's it.
And
Pretty simple.
When I was preparing for this, I started thinking about that camp. Not that I've seen it or anything. That must have been kind of pretty good preparation for some of the, I guess, deprivations of a long distance hike. Did you find that? Did you find that was something that wasn't entirely alien for you?
The hike itself, you mean, because of the camp?
Well, because of the camp, yeah. You don't have any running water. You have an outhouse and so on.
No, that's fair. Even the summer that I worked at Grafton Notch, I lived in the same thing. There was a husband and wife, older couple that owned a little cabin behind theirs. It cost me $5 a month. Me and this other park ranger rented it, and we had to bring in our own water. We had to cook on gas. We had gas lights, and we lived there all summer long. So, I think it does prepare you for it a little bit. It's hard not to. I mean, you do kind of deprive yourself if you spend that much time in the woods doing things, or you become, I don't know, the sensory side of you kind of goes to the woods. You're used to being out there, or you're used to being in the woods for long periods of time, and I think it helps.
I'm sure it must do. It was most of us. I mean, I came from a city. I was a city boy most of my life, and to go through the Arch of Springer and suddenly be plunged into what the Appalachian Trail was absolute foreign territory for me. But it was kind of your home in many ways. You knew where you were in the woods, I guess. And have you ever considered how you may have coped if you'd gone on this hike as a young man? Because I have, and I don't believe that I was equipped for it mentally, certainly physically. I don't think really I was ready for it at that time. I'm very happy I hiked it when I did in my 60s.
I don't think I could have done it earlier, and I don't know if it's because I wasn't prepared. I think I was prepared physically to do it. I just wasn't prepared mentally to do it. Not even close. I couldn't even think of it. For me, when I did go, it was more of a mental game than it was a physical game. The physical game came to me even though I was hurting and taking vitamin I the whole time I was on the trip. I was a little bit more ready for that than I was the mental side of it.
Well, tell us about that then, because I would have thought you were probably about as prepared as anybody could be for being in the woods in terms of as a person who knows that sort of lifestyle, as it were. How did you cope with the mental side of being out there?
I think stubbornness, in a way, a stubborn aspect of me. When I started the trail, I'd say whatever doubt I had kind of came through me doing zeros, or not that I hated doing them. It's just I felt like I was doing them because I wasn't sure I could keep going. And so I found myself kind of after week 2, week 3 of kind of making a decision that I had to string more days together and prove to myself, that I really was going to do this. I tried to take zeros when there was bad weather, and you never time them right. So I didn't take zeros because I thought I was going to rain or snow anymore. I just kept on moving on.
So in those early days, were you kind of disappointed with yourself about how you were coping with it?
That's a great question. I was. I for sure was. A couple times I really felt like I was more depressed off the trail than on. On the trail, I had everything to keep me going. I don't care whether it was rhododendron or flaming azaleas or the flowers or the birds or other people. But I really felt like I had, when I was in town or especially staying a night, the groups trying to get groceries, the bus rides, the van rides.
Sure.
I just wasn't a happy guy when I was staying there for any length of time. I think I told you initially. I found even later that doing narrows were better for me. Like I was reading back in some of my log entries, and I did 20 miles going into a town to resupply by 2:00. And, I felt like, okay, well, I did 20 miles. Like, wow. I've got all kinds of time to resupply, clean up, do my laundry, and get back on the trail at 7 a.m. And that's what I did.
Yeah, it makes more sense to a lot of people that does to do it that way. And so it sounds to me like the reality of the hike, because you'd been thinking about it literally for 50 years, or you'd first thought about it about 50 years ago. The reality of the hike probably wasn't what you expected it to be to start with, but was the reality of the hike eventually what you'd always hoped it would be? Yeah,
it sure was.
In what way?
I think that it was of all the things that I've done, the accomplishment of putting one foot in front of the other and, making it into Virginia or getting through Virginia or getting through the rocks in Pennsylvania. I really felt like I knew I was going to do it at a certain point. I would build these schedules, for me, it was just my head,
Sure.
Building these schedules of, okay, day 1, 2, 3, 4, I'd go 6 or 7 days out with resupplies. And if I stuck to it, I really felt like I was accomplishing something. I was meeting my goal. And the further I went and the closer I got, I knew for sure I was going to make it the rest of the way, and it was a fantastic
Barring
feeling.
Injury, of course, which we all know, everybody who finishes this trail is lucky because they haven't got injured in those 5 million steps as well. Did you get any injuries?
None that put me down and out. Yes, I slipped and fell in the whites. Actually, I was around Carter Dome after you go through Pinkham Notch, and the trail just gets terrible there and some of the descents, and I slipped and hit my head on a rock.
You look at some of these descents, you think, how am I ever going to get down? What is that all about?
Yeah, and they had airlifted somebody that was a through hiker off the trail like 2 days before, so I was, that was in my head too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I fell a lot. I didn't count them. But I fell a lot.
Do you know that's what I did? I
did. I listened to one of your post hike podcasts and thought, wow, he actually counted his falls. That's great.
And I shouted out the number as well. When you realize first you haven't died, second you can get up again, and you're going to live, you just shout out the number. It worked out well for me every time because I never stayed down, so it was good. And you mentioned previously when we spoke, and you told me that I could talk to you about it. You said that your wife wasn't initially supportive. Hadn't she been aware of what you wanted to do pretty much since you got married?
And maybe not since we got married. Talking about it, yes, but because, so much time had elapsed and passed, I would say that even I didn't talk about it for years, right? For a long time, right. That didn't go through my mind. But when I was in Michigan and I was kind of wrapping that up in 2017, I had been training there a bit, just long walks, just more stamina than up and down. And she knew I was thinking about it for sure. And, being gone 4 years, then coming back and 8 months later leaving.
So how'd that conversation go?
Yeah, she had to have questioned. I was being very selfish doing it, and especially when I look back at it, I was very determined to do it. But on the flip side too, she must have wondered, how much does this guy love me to be turning around and hopping on a trail, and he's only been home 8 months. So she knew I was going, but she wasn't. She had a lot on her mind. And as I told you, right before I left, I put the house up for sale, and we put the house up for sale, and it sold before I left. So we had a we had a closing in the middle of my hike, and she had to take care of all of the house viewings and
I shouldn't laugh. But and I want to ask about that because, and we're going to come to that a little bit later. But she took you there, didn't she? So she must have come around a little bit once she realized that's what you were going to do.
I'd hate to say she wasn't supportive. She didn't. I don't think she believed it. She wished I'd made a different decision. I think she really wished I'd put it off for a year or two.
Sure.
But she flew down with me to kind of get me on the trail, and and I made her, like I told you, I hiked south to tap in, and she had to drive that. I don't know if you've been on that fire road, but if you haven't been on that fire road, it is quite a road.
It is.
We had
yes,
a very big rental car, and she is scared to death of those mountain roads, and she was scared driving as a passenger up, and I can't imagine the fear that she had as she drove down back to Atlanta airport.
I bet you were imagining it as you walked off through the parking lot.
Yeah.
I
think she called me a few names through that process.
Quite right too. So did she come up and touch the approach sign with you?
She did not.
The top with you? Okay. But did she wait for you to come down and go through the parking lot?
Nope.
That's kind of.
She did not. She dropped me off and said, "See ya."
Yeah. Eventually, yeah.
Yeah, see you eventually.
So what turned around? Because I know she did fully support you in the end. What turned it round?
I had come home and we had closed on the house. So I was there for 18 days moving, and my son and my daughter-in-law were here too. So it was a very busy time, but I think with the weight of that off and the support that she saw from the community, whether it was my community or the community at large, because, we live in Bennington, so we're a trail town here too. Yeah, she picked up a couple hikers, so she started, kind of getting more involved in the trail. And when she saw me on McAfee Knob, I think I told you, it was her entry that day on that post was, even in my heart, I knew she had totally accepted it.
You know what? That's it's important that she did it for you anyway, because had she stayed mad at you, do you think you would have been able to complete the hike, or are you so damn stubborn you were going to complete it anyway?
I might have been so damn stubborn I would have completed it. It would have been disheartening though, to be honest. Yeah. I'm not sure I would have felt as good. And her support and outpouring of support, was unbelievable, Yeah. Anything I wanted or needed after that, emotionally or physically, she was there for me.
I tell you what, Jim, my thought about this has always been, if you don't have support from them, you're in trouble straight away. You start behind the 8 ball, whatever you call it. I don't even know over it.
That's right.
It is an important thing to have, an important part of it. But in fact, yours turned into a bit of a whole family thing, didn't it? Tell us how your family helps you through it.
It did, yeah. Once I reached New England, even Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, obviously Vermont, Maine, my family. I have 3. My youngest is 40, so my oldest is 46. Uh-huh. They were there to support me with the grandkids and help me resupply and met me on the trail and made things really easy for me. And I was really yearning for that family by the time I got up that far, and a lot of people don't have it, and I felt very lucky to have it.
Yeah, you must have been, especially at that end of the trail as well, because it's a debilitating hike at the best of times, and so to have those people buoying you on must have been wonderful for you. And I know that you actually summited with, was it your son and son-in-law or daughter?
My son flew home from Colorado, and that I was telling you how I plan my days. I ended up getting 2 days of parking. I knew I'd be pretty close a couple weeks ahead.
Sure.
But I had my son, a nephew of mine, a niece of mine, and her husband. So there were four youngins that met me in the park and
nice.
Hiked to the top with me and videotaped.
That's special. I'm going to talk about Katahdin in a minute, but so stepping right back to the beginning again. Did you have all the gear already? Being a hunting and fishing man, or was this a whole new experience for you? Because you have to put something together that is for a specific purpose, don't you?
Yeah, it was all new to me.
All right.
And I had a couple of mentors that helped me through it, but I really decided to go not crazy light. I didn't want to have 5.5 pounds, but I didn't want to be at 40 either. So I put a lot of thought into my pack and my sleeping bag and my tent.
So tell me, what did you took then? What did you start with?
I had a Z-Pack tent, sleeping bag. I'm sorry. Let me back up. I had a Z-Pack backpack, sleeping bag, and tent.
All right.
So the backpack was 15 ounces. Sleeping bag was a pound. The tent was a pound. I had the Solo. I went with the Solo. A lot of people with duplexes, but I had the old Solo too. They have a new one out now that looks a little bit different than the one I had.
Did the gear work out though? Because you don't know what it's going to be like until you actually use it, do you? But by and large, did it work for you?
By and large, it did. I mean, I certainly had tons of leaks in my backpack by the time I hit New England, and so I had everything in waterproof stuff sacks, everything.
Of course.
And I had tape to my pack, and I ended up slipping and falling around Rangeley Lake or Flagstaff, and I broke one of the carbon
the strap
enforcement plate in the back that held my waist strap. So I tried to get them to send me one next day, which isn't possible. But I did YouTube it, and you can take the middle one out and put it at the bottom and just get away with 2 of them instead of having 3, which was fantastic, by the way. The YouTube video showed you how to put it in and everything. And
cool.
And it saved my trip because I would have had to avoid or buy a new pack. And it got me right back on the trail.
So when you went to Amicalola and you started, no, you actually didn't go there. So you didn't actually weigh your pack when you started. Did you have a rough idea how much you were taking?
Yeah, I was 17.5 base without food. So I was 24 to 28. 28, if I left.
I was 42
for
first up. When I was 61, I was 42 pounds. Ridiculous, absolutely ludicrous. And so, how well prepared were you actually for those early miles? Did it feel a bit of a shock? Because Georgia isn't an easy. I don't think it's an easy state, especially as a first state. How did you find it?
I thought it was pretty. I started light, and it was recommended to kind of do 8s. So I found myself kind of getting 8s done pretty quickly. I'm a very early morning person, so
right.
I'm up at 6 and on my way. And
so you finish before lunchtime quite often, then.
You could be right. Most of the time I was. So it didn't take me too long to get up to 12s or 14s, and then I kind of found like the next jump was getting to 18s or 20s, and it took a while for me to get up there.
Yeah. But you know what? I don't think there's any hurry to do that because once you get to them, you get to them, don't you? And
right.
I guess everything worked out anyway because you got there in the end. And how did you cope with your fellow hikers? 'Cause I know you were more into the solitude idea, weren't you?
I was, but the number of times I laughed or enjoyed talking with fellow hikers was high, even though in the end, I love getting horizontal kind of on my own in my tent. I didn't really enjoy the shelter life, but I had a great time.
Don't you think mealtime's great at shelter life? I love that when you've got a picnic table that you can all go and sit in and nudge each other up and all sit and talk about things and what your latest gear is and you cook your food.
That's funny. No, it wasn't for me. I did like going there after I had kind of taken care of myself. Seeing and meeting everybody. And, after I was in a huge bubble, those bubbles that start out and you got 60 or 70 people in a campsite, and, guitars playing and music blaring. And, and I didn't have a problem sleeping. I thought I would, I always thought I was a picky sleeper. But I slept through anything.
You walk 2,000 miles, man. You're going to sleep.
Yeah. Even in the Smokies, I did stay in a shelter in the Smokies, and those, double layer shelters where you're shoulder to shoulder, and there's 14, 16 people in those shelters, and It didn't bother me a bit.
Nice. And how do you end up getting called grey ghost? Because like me, you've lost a bit of the original colour of your hair, I suspect.
Yeah, it's all grey.
Yeah.
It's from the fly fishing. So I had a friend of mine that had did half the trail the year before I left, and he was actually going to hike part of that with me, but he had plantar fasciitis, so he didn't.
Oh.
But he was going to come with me. He knew of my background and what I was doing for work, and I didn't get it by people on the trail, but of somebody that had hiked halfway through. He's the one that dubbed me Gray Ghost. It's a fly that we use in the state of Maine, and it's
nice.
a pattern that was invented by a woman named Carrie. I can't remember her last name now, but she guided in the Rangeley Lakes area and invented the Gray Ghost. So he's the one that named me Gray Ghost.
So you were the Gray Ghost. And did you? Because funny enough, I'm looking for somebody who actually apparently was fly fishing in each of the 14 states. Did you take a rod with you? Did you do any fishing?
No, it's crazy that I didn't as much fly fishing as I do. Yeah. But I was everybody thought I was crazy not to bring a fly rod, but I was very, very myopically focused on the hike.
So much so, you started with a stove, but you finished with cold food because it was easy. Because it was easier just to get on with life. Is that why you did it? Just because it was easier?
Yeah, it was. And from a time perspective, I think I told you I made my own alcohol stove, which I loved. I spent a lot of time with some prototypes before I ended up with the one I had. But it just got to the point where it's a little bit longer to use an alcohol stove to bring water to a boil. And I just did
it would take me 2 hours every morning to get out of camp. I mean, I was terrible. But so if you wake up early and you want to get on the path, get on the road, then it's an obvious thing to do is have cold food, I guess. And you already mentioned you got our trail to go back home again because you had to close up. And did you actually move home as well when you were home?
Yeah, we moved into a new house. So we closed on our house, bought a house all on the same day, and then moved all my stuff from my old house to the new house in whatever number of days. And of course I left another reason for Debbie to be a little bit upset at me. I left a lot of boxes unpacked.
Well, I was going to actually ask you, how did you cope with the interruption to your hike? But frankly, you just sucked it up because otherwise there was no other option, was there?
It was interesting. My son came back with me, and I was at Watauga Lake, just over the border in Virginia, and he came back to hike with me. Torrential rain the first few days, but he pushed me a bit. He's a guide in Colorado, so he's used to running around at 8,000 feet, and he got me going on longer days. And I think that week I was with him, I did 120 miles, and I was like, holy smokes, it was like that.
Yeah, it's just
I can do it.
A different hike, yeah, right, yeah. And we're going to obviously get to Katahdin now. Having gone up Katahdin as a young lad, had you been up there since, or is this a mountain you regularly climb, so you knew what it was like?
Yeah.
How did it feel to be finishing there at the end of a 2,200-mile hike? Because it must be different for you.
It felt like a different mountain, than it was.
Oh, really?
All of the. I might have hiked it a dozen times or more.
Oh, right.
But it was a different mountain when I climbed it that time, and always will be.
Yes, I'm sure. Was it emotional?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. You still feel it now, I can tell.
I am.
Isn't that amazing? It's not amazing. I entirely understand it. So, what were you feeling? Were you glad it was over, or were you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I talked with so many young people along the way, and they were worried about ending because they were, they didn't know what they were going back to.
Sure.
They didn't know if they'd found what they came on the trail to find, and they didn't want to lose what they were feeling on the trail. And for me, it wasn't like that. It was a great journey. But I knew exactly what I was, I was happy to be done. I was happy. I knew exactly what I was going back to.
Bloody great honey-do list, no doubt.
Absolutely. But I wasn't afraid of it, I guess, is where I was going. a lot of the people on the trail were afraid of what they were going back to, and I wasn't. I had a lot of very, very good, strong feelings when I finished the trail and finished the hike, and I went back to just a very happy life with my family and doing the things that I do, and I still get out and every now and then and climb that mountain or do spec or do the Bigelows, and I have fun.
So did you kind of cross something off just sort of check a box with this? Once it was done, it was done. Because I presume you're a one and done. There's no other long hike with you. This is a question from your wife, by the way.
Well, I don't think we talked about this in the pre-interview, but I'll talk about it now. When I finished the hike, I actually got West Nile virus. I think I got it in the 100-mile, and it led to Guillain-Barré, which put me in Albany Med for 2 weeks. I couldn't walk.
Wow.
I was, in less than a month after I finished the trail, I was in a walker. And I had some long-term effect. It took maybe 8 months for me to get back to just walking around the block here. So it was kind of a weird way to end the trail. Yeah. So I had planned on finishing the long trail, which I still may do. It's not that much left to do. Yeah. But there was kind of a weird ending. Yes. A week later, they all thought I had Lyme's disease or anaplasmosis, but it turned out to be West Nile virus, and I didn't find out that for 3 months. Long after my hospital stay.
Wow. So, last question: what was you've built up to this all your life? Although you said there were many years you didn't think about it and so on. You had this great support from home in the end. Was there one takeaway, or was there a bunch of takeaways? What do you think you've learned? Firstly, about yourself and about your relationship, I suspect, but about the whole thing. What has the hike given you?
I've been asked that question a lot, and I'm always struck by the fact that I can't pinpoint anything. As big as it was for me, I couldn't tell you a favorite part because I loved it all. I couldn't tell. I mean, McAfee Knob was a very epic favorite time on the trail for me. Doing, the entire hike, the entirety of it, the planning of it, the starting it, the ending it. I mean, all of it was so great. I don't know. I could try to, I don't know if I could narrow it down to one thing. Can you?
It was a community, always is a community for me. And I was more into that. I actually wonder if your wife were here, if I asked her the question, what difference does she see in you, if any?
Well, you want to ask her?
Oh, totally.
Hang on one sec.
So looking forward to this. He's wandered out now.
Steve wants to ask you one question.
As you can imagine, I'm going to cut some of this, but she'll be here in a second.
Put the headphones on.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I've got a question. I actually just asked your husband what his biggest takeaways were on the trail. And then he didn't really know any. So I said, what do you think your wife, has your wife noticed any changes in you since you've come back from the trail? And he said, do you want to ask her? So I'd like to ask you. Do you see any change in him?
Yes, I did see change in him, but I think that was in large part due to him falling ill right after the hike. I think that colored a lot of it. And it's only been later through his talking about it and through looking at the photographs again that I'm realizing what it meant.
Right. And I know you supported him, not initially, but you supported him on the hike eventually and so on. Are you impressed that he finished it?
Very much impressed, not surprised.
Right.
Not a bit surprised.
He does seem a determined guy, doesn't he?
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But very impressed. I mean, that's a huge endeavor, and to begin it at 61. And I mean,
I did
it's an
exactly the same
amazing
thing.
feat. Yeah,
I did it at
it's
61
huge.
and 66, ridiculously.
Sure.
But that's lovely. I just wanted to find out from you, and that's a better answer than he gave. All right. All right. Can I have you back on then? Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, she. It was interesting what she said. She noticed changes because of the illness, probably. But look, you've been a great personal interview. You had a great personal story there, and I really enjoyed the fact you let me speak to your wife at the end. And I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, buddy. Take it easy,
Yeah.
okay?
Talk to you
Bye.
soon. Bye-bye.
Even though he can see it clearly every day he's at camp, he still got emotional talking about Katahdin. I guess that's the power it exerts over us when we're doing a long-distance hike. We dream about that mountain, even though it's over 2,000 miles in front of us when we begin. Then as we get nearer, we seem ever more likely to make it. It is such a pull. And do you know what? I think it's a good thing that we still feel the emotion of that moment. I still do. The hairs on the back of my neck still rise when I think about Katahdin and my climb up it. It's an amazing moment. I like what he said when he answered a question from me. He said a lot of the people on the trail were afraid of what they were going back to. He wasn't afraid of that, and thinking back to my own experience, he's spot on in that several people I met were terrified about what awaited them when they got home. It's something to consider when you're out there, and it may well be part of post-trial depression. Jim was great to talk with, and of course we had the extra bonus of talking with his wife to see any changes she'd seen in him. Nice fella. And don't forget to check out the show notes to see the view from Jim's camp. It is freaking awesome. Now let's catch up with our Mighty Blue class of 23. First up, we've got a bit more emotion with Jessica Lang-Wright. But before we hear what got her emotional, she tells us about her new trail name and the famous person who named her. Here's Jessica.
Hello.
Hey Jessica, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, I think we might as well just go ahead and record straight off. So we'll start recording now. How's it going out there? Are you enjoying it so far?
For the most part, yeah. There's been a couple of days that have been a little hairy, but so far so good.
I've heard from another member of the class of 23, a guy called Steve Noda, the Australian guy. But I'll come back to that in a minute. So you apparently got your trail name and you were named by somebody kind of famous. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So my very first day, my husband and I drove up to the Springer Mountain parking lot. Mm-hmm. And we had a rental car. He was spending the first couple of days with me to kind of get me started. And we had a rental car that we kind of wanted to shuffle to another point so he could spend more time with me. Yeah. And there was this van parked in the parking lot. And when I looked at it, I knew I recognized it, but I couldn't figure out why. And my husband went over to the person in it and started talking to them. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, are you Miss Janet? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, I like had a fangirl moment. And
she's so understated, isn't she? Don't you think so?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the band's not understated.
No, it's true. Yeah.
She definitely is.
Yeah. So tell us then. So you were talking to her and she obviously knows you've got blue hair because that's pretty obvious. So tell us about it.
Yeah. So I'm like talking to her, and I'm dressed in blue from head to toe, which was not entirely planned, but it's the way things are because obviously it's my favorite color. Yes, she's like, "Are you through hiking?" And I said, "Yeah, I hope so." And she's like, "Do you have a trail name yet?" And I said, "No." And she says, "Well, you look just like a mountain bluebird." And like, I just was like, "Oh my God, I think I have a trail name now." So my name is Bluebird.
Nice. And you wear it well, do you? With dressed in blue all the time with your blue hair. I suspect everybody that sees you coming, don't they?
Pretty much. I've had a couple of days lately when people are like, "Oh, are you Bluebird? I've heard about you." And I'm like, "Oh God, why?"
Nice. And
Weird travels.
And you've had all sorts of, and I've seen your Facebook, you've had all sorts of weather out there, haven't you? But what I really want to know is how's the minus 20 degree sleeping bag doing?
It was a very good choice. We had a couple of nights in Georgia where it got down into the upper teens at night.
It's fresh.
And with the negative 20-degree bag, all of my puffy coat, booties, pants, toe warmers, liner, I finally managed to stay warm.
Nice.
So, yeah.
So how has the weather been generally?
So it was a good choice.
Is it generally pretty cold or what?
It started off generally pretty cold. We had a kind of a long stretch, like when I was hiking out of Neal's Gap, I went through miles of hoarfrost because I think it was St. Patrick's Day. It had rained like crazy, and then the temperature just dropped, so everything froze. I heard from some people who were out during that and like had to wait until 10:30 to get hiking again because their shoes were frozen, laced, and they couldn't get their shoes open. So it had been pretty cold for quite a while, and it's finally starting to kind of warm up. Like we haven't had anything, I'd say, below 30 in a little while.
So is the minus 22-degree bag still, is it now starting to get too hot?
Not quite. I think I had one night total where I was actually, like, I fell asleep outside of it, but then sometime during the night I had to crawl back in. So, probably after the Smokies at some point I will have to send it back home, but as of right now it's still working well. It's just too heavy and I wish I could get rid of it, but it is what it is.
And is the trail like you thought it would be? Is it meeting your expectations as a trail, or are there things you're discovering about it that are different to what you thought it would be?
People have asked me this question a few times, and I am not sure what I was expecting, but it is way harder physically, mentally, emotionally than I ever expected.
In what way?
I mean, everybody talks about how it goes straight up and then it goes straight back down, and they're not kidding. So, like the climb out of the NOC, was just endless.
Classic.
Yeah, and it was cold and raining that day, and you just felt like it's only 7 miles, but we're never going to get there to that shelter. And yeah, so the physical challenge is definitely real. The mental and emotional challenge is coming from, it's just all interlaced together.
Sure.
You get challenged physically, and then the mental stuff starts rolling. And, we've had a couple of scary storms, and that has definitely been tough.
Yeah. A storm in the mountains is unlike any other storm, isn't it? And it just feels like it's all around you, and you feel like you see the flashing lights of the trees, and it's like a nightmare, to be honest with you, when it really gets bad out there. But tell us about these frightening incidents, because I think I've heard of one of them already from someone else.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people heard about the storm that killed a bunch of people in Mississippi. And I found out about that afterwards. That storm kind of came through the area where I was. I had just crossed the line into North Carolina the day before, basically. So that night we had terrible, terrible thunderstorms, high winds, rain, all of it. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, one of my tent stakes must have pulled out of the ground and my tent collapsed on me.
Wow.
And it's still dark. It's still storming. I just sat there laying on my back with one hand holding up a trekking pole and another hand holding the other edge of the tent. Yeah. And I'm not a big fan of thunderstorms to begin with. And I just kind of laid there for a while, like just not knowing what to do other than trying to keep my tent up. And it went on for another 3 hours. At some point, I finally crawled out under the vestibule, jammed the stake back in the ground, got back in the tent, but then another one pulled up. So I basically spent like 2 more hours trying to hold my tent together. And my sleeping pad was basically like a life raft in the middle of it because, everything was getting soaking wet. So anything that was on the sleeping pad was okay, but like everything else was wet. And needless to say, when I finally got out of my tent in the morning, I wasn't too happy. and didn't get many miles done that day. I think I hiked 3 miles after that, and that was all I could muster, and got to the next shelter. And luckily the weather had cleared up, so I was able to kind of dry stuff out, but it was really, really scary.
I bet it was, yeah. But you kind of knew you're going to get storms anyway. Why did you not consider sleeping in the shelter?
There was no shelter where I had camped that night.
Right.
And up until that point, I was kind of swearing that I was never going to sleep in a shelter. Well, I got over that real quick. So,
well, you know what? It's making changes on the fly, and you need to be prepared to do that. You know, that's probably strengthened you in some ways, but it's nerve wracking. This is not for the faint hearted, no doubt about it. So you just hiked 3 miles that day. How did you feel at the end of that day? Did you feel like you'd had enough or not?
I was pretty sure I was going home.
Okay, but you didn't.
I figured at the next road crossing, I was gonna go home.
Yeah.
So
why didn't you?
Spent the night.
Why didn't you then, Jessica?
Honestly, I said to myself, if there was anybody at the next road crossing, that I might ask for a ride and try to get out, and there was nobody there, so I kept going.
So that's interesting. So you set some expectations, even though you weren't quite at the road crossing. Were you in the event? Were you glad that there wasn't somebody there?
Afterwards, yeah.
Good.
When I first got there, I was kind of like, okay, I guess I kind of have to keep walking because there's nobody here and there's no cell service.
Right. So, now, what about the other incident, which I think is what I heard about today?
Yeah. So this was about a week ago. I was hiking out of Fontana Dam. So I had taken a 0 in Robbinsville, which is nearby. Yeah. I hiked out of Fontana Dam that day, and it was raining. And in Robbinsville, which I guess was probably lower elevation, it didn't seem so bad. And people that I ran into eventually all kind of said the same thing. Like, we just didn't think it was going to be that bad. Well, it really was that bad. So I'm hiking out of Fontana and, got my rain gear on and all that. And within probably 3 or 4 miles, you're going into the Smokies now, and you're going up in elevation, and that classic Blue Ridge Mountains kind of thing with all the fog and everything is happening, and the rain is cold and driving. And after a while, I think there's no rain gear in the world that's going to protect you for 12 miles in that.
Not for 12 minutes. Not for 12 minutes in that, I tell you, let alone 12 miles.
Yeah. So, it seemed to hold up fairly well for a while, but eventually I'm soaking wet to the bone, and it's cold. And there was a tent site that I think was only it was either 4 or 8 miles in, I can't remember, but it was a shorter distance.
Sure.
And when I got there, I knew I was in trouble.
Wow.
I was, like I said, soaking wet and cold, and there was nobody around. And something in my mind said, you got to get to the shelter.
Yeah.
Because I needed to be around people. And I had a feeling I was going to need help, and I did. So I just told myself to keep going. And 12 miles is a lot for me still, even at this point. And I had 4 people pass me early on that day, but I did not see another human being for hours after that.
Wow.
And the trail turned into what I affectionately call the Appalachian River.
Yes.
And, at this point, the feet are soaked, it's 3 inches of running muddy water, and you're just walking straight through it because it doesn't matter anymore. And even if you try to walk off on the sides, it's just melting underneath your feet, and you're sliding around. And I'm terrified of falling because of my back injuries. So I'm slowly kind of making my way through this. And there was a point where I'm holding on to my trekking poles, and my hands are so cold that I can't open up my hands.
Wow.
They're just frozen to my trekking poles. And like I said, I knew I was in trouble. So I just kept telling myself, I got to keep going. It doesn't matter how far it is. I got to get to the shelter. Eventually, I made it to the shelter. And when I did, I wasn't expecting there really to be anybody in it because, I mean, these conditions were terrible. And I figured everybody's got to be smarter than me, right? Well, somebody came up behind me, like 0.2 from the shelter. And at first I thought my brain was starting to play tricks on me. And then he said, I'm going to check far out. This shelter's got to be here somewhere. And I was like, okay, I can't be imagining that. And we ended up hiking into that shelter. And when I think about it now, that shelter, it looked like something out of like one of the old Muppet shows. Like there were just people hanging out everywhere, you know, and all of their stuff, and everybody's talking, and it was entirely overwhelming when I came around the corner. And I think the guy that came up behind me knew that I was in trouble too. So just luckily, these Smokies shelters, at least all of them that I've seen so far, they have a fireplace in them.
That's right.
And there was this guy named Smoke Master who had zeroed in the shelter because he night hiked into it, saw 2 bears, and got scared.
Right.
He had been tending that fire all day long, apparently.
Wow.
And so he was like taking it on himself to like help people dry their clothes and keep that fire going. And I told him afterwards his name should have been Lifesaver because he was instrumental to everybody being okay in that shelter. And I got there and basically just broke down crying, and people just started giving me hot liquids and hot food. And a woman that was there, she's like, I'm going to go in your pack and we're going to get you out of these wet clothes. And they just took care of me. And I really needed that at that point. And thank God for everybody who was in that shelter that night.
Hey, Jessica, that is trail magic, by the way. That is fantastic. You know, everybody, and they
For
do.
sure.
I would have guessed I would have known they would have done that. They'd all rally round. They'd all want to help you and make you better. So when did you start feeling better?
It took a while. I got out of the wet clothes, got into the sleeping bag. I still wasn't getting warm. I have a small, like 16-ounce Nalgene with me because I figured on the cold nights I might need to boil water and throw it in the Nalgene and put it at the bottom of my sleeping bag.
Sure.
Somebody boiled water, put it in there, and gave it to me to like stick in my femoral arteries, and that finally did the trick. So I don't know how long it was, but it was a while before I got warm.
So that was about a week ago, and you sound emotional about it now in many ways as well. So so what was the thought process the next morning?
I have to get to Clingman's Dome to get out of here.
Okay.
And that's going to take me a couple more days.
But you're past Clingman's Dome now, aren't you?
Yes.
Right.
I've made it to Newfound Gap at this point.
Right. So what happens now then?
I'm going to keep going.
Good.
You know, it's amazing what a shower and a 0 day and a warm bed in a hotel can do.
Of course. You know what, people, you should write that on a T-shirt. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it is amazing what these things can do. If I think I'll steal that line actually. Do a T-shirt. But you sent me a note. You've taken 34 days to make it 200 miles. But you've taken 6 or 7 0 days. But that doesn't matter. Have you got your legs now? Are your legs kicking in? Are they starting to work for you better?
I honestly don't know. Some days I feel like my legs are strong and my lungs and heart are not keeping up. Some days it's the other way around.
Right.
And the last week or so with the high elevation that we've been at, it's been really hard to say, honestly.
Wow.
I don't know. I felt like my legs were pretty strong starting out, but my heart and lungs couldn't keep up. I honestly don't know at this point.
The mere fact you're keeping on talks to how much you want this, and that's important. There's no point in doing this if you're not enjoying it in any way, shape, or form, or you're not getting something out of it. you've got to start enjoying it though at some stage, I suspect, because you want this to be a positive experience, not a negative experience. And I should imagine that was a particularly negative experience, although what came out of it was a positivity of your friends all around you, all gathered around you. So I think that's a good thing. But, these are decisions only you can make. And I know that leaving Gatlinburg, as you say, a comfy room and a shower and flush toilets, you've got 3 more days in the Smokies. And then the second half's easier than the first half, I think. So that's good. But just keep, if you want to just keep going, get your head straight and keep going forward, because that's the only thing you do. You can either go home and you'll hate yourself if you go home, I'm sure, or you can go forward. And then if after another week it just isn't working for you, then you know what the answer is, don't you?
Right. Right.
But it's easy for me to say keep your chin up. I'm calling you from a nice warm study, so it's nice and comfy and cozy here. Hopefully you're getting comfortable. You're getting comfortable now, and you're starting to feel the thing. You've obviously communicated with your husband. What is he saying about this?
I told everybody at home before I came out here that no matter how much I say I want to go home, do not tell me to come home. So
good.
They're holding up their end of the bargain for the most part.
Right.
But he has plans to come visit me in early May.
That'd be nice.
And he did say, if I need to drive you home at that point, then I can drive you home. But to try and keep going out here and see how it goes after this. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is I knew better than to go out in those conditions, and I did it anyway because I didn't want to spend another $100 on a hotel room, and that was just stupid. And I'm really beating myself up a bit over that.
You know what though, Jessica? There's no
learning process, right?
Yeah, there's no point. I read something the other day. Someone said there's no point in looking behind what's happened in the past, because you're not going that way. You're going forward. So just don't worry about that. Do not beat yourself up over that. We all make stupid mistakes. I made stupid mistakes, but don't do them again. Learn from making a mistake, right, and try not to do that again. But you're going to make mistakes, of course you are. But just, it's not my place to be proud of you, but I'm proud of you for toughing it out, because those 2 experiences, either one of those could easily have taken somebody off the trail. So I think you've done great so far, and just keep going. This is not easy. You knew it wasn't going to be easy, and try, when you start enjoying it, then you'll really get into it. Okay.
I think, again, like we're just in a portion of the year too, when the conditions are just going to be challenging.
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully as things warm up, because, rain in 70 degrees is no big deal. Rain in 40 or 50 degrees is unfortunately a big deal.
It sucks. Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah.
Well, I hope the weather improves for you. Okay. And we'll catch up again in a couple of weeks, but stay in touch by text so I know what you're thinking. Okay.
Will do.
All right, Jessica. Take it easy. Okay. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Wow. She's certainly going through it, isn't she? Now, I'm sure that Jessica will be the first to tell you not to be put off by what's happened to her, but those experiences teach you coping skills that you have to learn on the fly. And as always, your fellow travellers will always step up to help you out. Just before we hear from Ron Ward, I wanted to remind you all once more that the Woods Hole Weekend video series is discounted by $100 until the end of this month. So you've got just over a week to take advantage of the offer and secure yourself about 13 or 14 hours of video instruction, advice and tips to help you complete your through hiking or section hiking goal. Just go to hikingradionetwork.com and click on the Woods Hole Weekend tab to watch the trailer and buy the series. And thanks to all of you who've taken up this offer already. Now, Ron Ward is blissfully happy out there and won't let anything get in his way, even a dodgy knee. Here's Ron. Well, we're back on with Ron Ward. Last time we spoke with Ron, he was at home, but he's now on the trail. How are you, Ron?
I am great, Mighty Blue. Thanks for asking. I hope you're doing well.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm not hiking, but and I looked at various texts you've sent me since you started. I know you started the 23rd of March, wasn't it? But you pretty quickly developed some information on your knee. How's that? How did that develop, and how's it work? How's it feeling now?
To cut to the chase, it's my right knee. I had some IT ligament irritation. It started pretty quickly after, getting to the top of Springer Mountain.
Right.
And I've suffered from this before,
Right.
but with a little bit of Advil and a good compression knee brace and some stretches and that sort of thing, I've been able to tolerate it. And actually, my right knee is doing fine. My left knee's developed a little bit of runner's knee on the kneecap, the patella, but I've got another knee brace.
Right. So how are you coping with that? Because this is early to get a knee injury, for anybody, any time is a bad time to get an injury. But in those early days, it's kind of daunting to think you've got to go 2,200 miles with it. You've obviously got the right attitude, but how are you actually feeling physically with it?
I'm feeling fine. I take it slow in the mornings, make sure that I get, warmed up. I do a lot of stretches.
Sure.
I've learned a couple of yoga techniques to really stretch that IT band on both sides.
All right.
And I feel, for the most part, Steve, during the hike, during the day, I feel fine.
That's great. That's you've got to keep. To be honest with you, you've just got to keep positive, because it's a long way to be miserable. so it's good. It's good that you're positive.
I think part of it. Yeah, you're right. I think part of it for me is just knowing what it is, and not being concerned or worried or anxious about, oh my gosh, am I making this worse, or is this going to take me out? It's something that I deal with. But as I progressed, I've done over I'm around 217 miles now.
Wow.
I've developed a routine that helps me manage it. So it's pretty tolerable. I have to be careful on the downhills, particularly here. And I'm about midway through the Smokies right now.
Right. You're actually in Gatlinburg, aren't you?
Yeah. The great city of Gatlinburg.
Yeah. So one of the things in one of your notes you sent to me, you're very good at actually sending me texts, so I know what's going on and so on. You stayed at Chica and Sunset's hostel. What was that like?
Chica and Sunset's hostel is 5-star.
Cool.
I give them big props. Great location. As you well know, it's super small, so there's only room for 4. So
I've never been. Ron, I've never been there. I've never been to Chica and Sunset Hostel, and I've not asked anybody about it. I've spoken to both the two of them. They've been on the show talking about it, but had you said anything not positive about them, I would have actually not included it in the recording, because they're nice people. But you enjoyed it. You enjoyed it there, did you?
I did. It's a great. They are great, and they picked us up right there at Rock Gap. Sunset showed up right on time and picked us up about 12:15. I was hiking with 2 others. We went into Franklin. One of the persons that I was hiking with needed some shoe work, and I did a bit of gear exchanging, and then we had Mexican dinner in the great city of Franklin, and then went back to the hostel. It was real quiet. It's very family oriented, because Chica and Sunset live above the hostel. So you go up there and they have a breakfast in the morning and then dump you right back off on trail. So, it was fantastic and worth every penny. I mean, it was only like $60, I think.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
Very good deal.
And you mentioned you've made some gear changes. So how did it become apparent you needed to change gear then? And what did you change?
Well, if you remember from our last conversation, your words were echoing in my head. I'm not blaming you, so don't take it that way. But your words about a tent that you need room to swing a cat around, we just kept in my head, and you're absolutely right. So I sent home my one-person tent, which was just really too small. Yes. I think it's great if you're out for a couple of days and you got great weather and you just, you're not in your tent a long time. But as you well know, thru hikers tend to spend a good amount of time with inclement weather and sleeping late and that sort of thing. And it's nice to be able to put your stuff together inside the tent. So once we, it was in Clayton, I think we got off at Dix Creek and went into Hiawassee. Yeah, it was Hiawassee, not Clayton. I shipped home my Z-Pack Saltplex, and I bought a Big Agnes Copper Spur UL2, and I absolutely love it. It's the size of a hotel. It's freestanding.
But that's what you were talking about originally, wasn't it? You wanted a Big Agnes Copper Spur to start with, but you changed your mind, didn't you?
I did.
Oh, dear.
It just goes to show you sometimes too much research can mess you up. But you're exactly right. When you and I had first talked, that was one of the things that I wanted. But I've got it now. I got a great deal on it. So it's great. And so that was like the first big gear change for me.
Right. Have you made any other changes then?
I added a bear vault.
Oh, did you? Now more and more people are doing that. So tell me, what was the why was that choice? Why did you make that choice?
At Carter's Gap, there were 6. Now don't quote me on this. There were 5 or 6 bear bags, and I mean a combination of Dyneema sacks and sacks that were taken by bear activity over the course of one night.
Wow.
And so in North Georgia, as we were passing through, there was a ton of bear activity. That and the lack of good tree limbs to do a quality bear hang, getting 12 feet up and 8 feet out.
Yeah.
It was almost impossible. The trees, as you know, the trees in North Georgia and southern North Carolina are so close together. You could have, the ultimate textbook PCT hang, but there's another tree probably 3 feet from it. So it sort of defeats the whole purpose. So when I got to Franklin, I just bit the bullet and I bought what I thought was going to be too small, but the 450 ended up being, it's fine for me. It's not huge, but it fits in my pack great.
And where do you exactly? You put it in your pack, so you obviously you must have had to get rid of something, because most of us, you go out there, our packs are pretty full. So add something like a bear vault, that must be quite, to take up quite a bit of space.
It takes up just a little bit more than my Dyneema food bag did, but actually creates a little bit of rounded space, if you will, for things like my power pack and my med kit and my stove and all that kind of fits next to it. It actually it worked out better than I thought it would. And it's super easy to just stuff it under a tree limb or a stump or something like that.
Sure. Great.
I did keep my Dyneema Bear food sack, the one I had earlier, because it doesn't weigh anything and it's plenty big. And if I need to hang the bear vault, I can put it in that sack. And in the Smokies, they've got different kinds of rules. So, but I've got plenty of room in my pack. I've got so little gear that it works out.
Right, cool. And you mentioned that you've had awful rain in and out of the NOC, and now both those climb up out of the NOC, but also that quite dramatic climb down into the NOC in rain. That must have been quite scary.
Well, we were so socked in coming down into the NOC from Westerval shelter that I was hiking with another guy, this Belgian guy who was really great, but it was a full-on thunderstorm. I mean, lightning very close by, and this guy's carrying an umbrella. And it was kind of funny because he, in his broken English, he said, I'm starting to question the intelligence of carrying, an aluminum umbrella up here on top. And I said, you just go 50 meters in front of me, pal, and we're all good.
Yeah.
Some of those switches coming down into the NOC, it was pea soup. We couldn't see anything anyway, so we had no idea how close we were to the ledge, when you have to do a couple of those little button hooks.
Yeah.
But the rain was actually worse. That was on Good Friday, and the rain was actually worse the next day on Saturday when we were coming out of the NOC. It was very, very cold. We all I hiked alone. I've been hiking alone for a good while now, but coming up out of the NOC was probably the worst day, just because I was soaking wet and near hypothermia and among everybody else when I finally got to camp, just stripped down in the shelter and got my base layer on.
Yeah, we
tried to dry it off.
We all tend to lose a bit of modesty when we get to where we need to strip off quickly, don't we?
Oh yeah. We had about 16 or 17 of us crammed in that one shelter. So we were, elbow to elbow, as they say. But Easter Sunday, the next day, was just an absolute perfect day. So the next day going into, I guess, Cable Gap was a long day. I think it was a 15 or 16 miler for me. Probably one of the best days I've had on trail. I felt great.
Nice.
I felt blessed by the weather, and it was just a great day. So, and every day since then has been good. We've been really lucky with the weather.
So it's working out. The important thing is that you seem to be enjoying it, which is great. Have you taken stock of the people around you much? You say you're hiking alone, but do you hang out with people in the evening or at shelters generally?
Yeah, generally. So the same group of people kind of meets up every day.
Yeah.
So with some familiar faces, which is great. That adds that spirit of community that,
of course, yeah, I
talked about in my initial interview. But that's something that we kind of look forward to. And I tend to, kind of leapfrog people as I'm going.
Yes.
I'm hiking alone, but I started the first couple of weeks with two. A young lady who's 29, and then an older gentleman who's 72, and a marathon runner. And he had to, unfortunately, at Chica and Sunsets in Franklin, he decided to call it. He just was having major back pain, and he just wasn't having any fun. So he had his wife come get him, and but I've been in touch with him a little bit. So since then, I've kind of been keeping my own pace, hiking my own hike, and that's been a lot of fun. I didn't, I've always thought of myself as a very, very social person and kind of eager to be with others. But the solitude of hiking for 5, 6, 7 hours a day has been refreshing, and I find it really appealing. Knowing that, arrive at a shelter later with either new people or, some of the I'll call them regulars.
Yes. Isn't it funny to start thinking about people on the trail as regulars? But yeah, that's what they are. Well, look, I'm glad you were able to connect and you're enjoying it so far. Over 200 miles, great stuff. We'll catch up again in a few weeks' time, and just stay in touch and let me know what's going on, okay?
I will do it, and I appreciate your patience with me. The Verizon service out here is, as you well know, is kind of crazy. So it's hard for us to connect. I felt bad the other day for not being available when I was heading out of Fontana, but
I totally get it.
Great. I totally get it. Moment, but
yeah,
fun.
Yeah, cool. Okay, mate. Well, look, enjoy it, and we'll catch up again soon. But just stay in touch. But by text is a great way to do it. I get those texts, so let me know what's going on and anything you want to report. All right.
We'll do it.
Cheers, buddy. Take it easy. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers then. Bye. You can't get more positive than that, can you? He started having knee issues early on, but sees it as all part of the whole, and he's managing it. Managing your hike is often only obvious when you're out there, so you have to be ready to adapt on the fly. We'll hear from Ron again in a few more weeks. Just before we hear from another Mighty Blue class starter, I wanted to shout out to our donors who keep us afloat. This week, thanks go to monthly donors: Sabre Thompson, Ron Ward, who we just spoke with, Todd Withrow, Suzanne Johnson, Betty McInerney, Sean Deadwiley, Ann Pickens, Sharon James, Emmanuel Bravo Ramos, and Kevin Weidman. Also, Lance Goldau bought all 3 of my books and generously added a donation for the show. That's so nice of you, Lance. And thanks go to all of our supporters. We just could not do this without you. Now, let's hear from Joanne Flagg, who started from Harper's Ferry about a week ago. Here's Joanne.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Joanne, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. And this is our first time actually talking with you on the trail. So when did you start and how's it going?
I started on Friday, the 14th in Harper's Ferry.
Right.
And it's going very well.
Well, you're, I think, our first flip-flopper this year. So Was that always the plan to start on the 14th? I can't quite recall. I haven't got my notes in front of me because you've just texted me saying you've got 2 bars to talk. So obviously I jump on the phone. Was that always the plan to start then?
It was. Yeah, last year I came down to the Flip Flop Festival in April because I knew I wanted to flip-flop, but I didn't want to miss the Flip-Flop Festival, but I didn't want to have to go by Flip-Flop Festival dates. So
Right. So 14th
that's next
was.
weekend, and I wanted to start, 14th is earlier.
How was that taxing first 3 miles along the canal path out of Harper's Ferry?
Well, that was pretty easy, but those first 3 days were really hot.
Were they really?
And boy, they were above 80 and humid.
Oh, wow. It's going to get hotter. It's going to get hotter.
I know. So I really did feel it in my muscles, but the good thing is you cover it at night. So I've been okay when I get up in the morning and just take it slow and easy. Today is in the 60s with a nice breeze. What a difference.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So what time was it get down to at night? Do you know?
The first couple of nights was about 60. Last night was probably the 50s, and it was very windy in the middle of the night with a little bit of rain.
Are you staying in the shelters or in a tent or even a hammock?
I've been in 1 shelter and in 3 tents.
You mean 1 tent, really, but 3 nights. So
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So have you met people yet? Are there many flip floppers this year?
I've met some people who started lower down. I've met a couple of people who are working on sections that they had done something previously and for some reason had to get off trail. So they've come back on to get on trail.
Right.
So, and I've met a few, there's day hikers. One thing I didn't expect was to see the weekenders. I started on a Friday.
Right. Of
so
course,
the
yes.
first night I was at a shelter with a big camping area, and there were people with big tents and big camp chairs and a big Coleman stove. I was like, this looks very out of place to me. So I was a little surprised, but good.
One of the things I noticed when I was through hiking, obviously not having showered for several weeks, probably in some cases, or several days at least, was that you could smell people's perfume and deodorant as they walked past you. So that was something really noticeable when you stick yourself. And you sent me a text and you're talking about making a plan and adjusting throughout the day. What does that mean to you?
Well, like with the heat, I had tentative plans to go. I thought I would be further than I am by now. The first day I did 10 miles, which was my plan and good. And I thought the other days I might do a little bit more to reach certain shelter areas for camping.
Yeah.
But then then you just have to see how your day goes and keep checking where I am, and then end up it's almost like a short goal and a long goal. If you're smart enough to make that plan to have 2. Okay, so this will be a shorter goal, but this is my ultimate longer goal. And I just had to shorten my mileage. Like the second day, I did 7 miles, I think. And then the third day, 9. And then today will be 12.
You know what?
This isn't too bad out of the gate. That's
fine. Yes, that's absolutely fine. And remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. I know it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. There's absolutely no hurry to get there because you've got to build into it. You've got a long, long, long way to go. So don't berate yourself for doing what most people do. 7, 8, 9 miles for first couple of weeks is fine for most people. If you want to do more because you can.
Yeah.
But just don't worry about it. Don't give yourself goals you can't necessarily achieve because you may not want to achieve them, and also enjoy it along the way. Are you hiking with anybody at all?
Nope, not really. I started with a high school classmate, but then we went our separate ways, and I'm just kind of been doing my own thing and liking it. Sometimes I need to stop to take a look around at things besides my feet, where my feet are going.
Why did you mentioned your classmate, you went separate ways. Were you planning on hiking with that classmate for a bit longer or what?
No, we just had different plans.
Oh, okay.
It's all good.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned you've had some adventures already. First adventure highlight. So what's happened?
So snakes. First day out, I see this big black rat snake on a big rock. It was about 4 feet long.
Yeah.
Next day, I see a rat snake on the side of a tree, like 12 feet up, right on the side of the trail.
Yeah, I don't like that at all on the tree. There's something about it that makes it look like it makes it look like they're going to jump on you, doesn't it?
I like snakes. I don't know. I always picked up snakes, and before I left, my son said to me, "What kind of snakes are you going to see?" I said, "Probably rattlesnakes and copperheads." And he looks them up and he goes, "This is what they look like. Just because they look cuddly, do not pick them up." I said, "Okay."
Oh, dear.
So I saw a baby rat snake on the trail about a foot long.
Oh,
it
right.
was very flat and its mouth was open. So I thought it was dead. I thought people had been walking on it.
All right. Did you pick it up?
So I touched it with my pole and its body poked up and it got round again. He closed his mouth and he squirmed away.
Oh,
It was
God.
very interesting.
Ooh, I can't stand it. I don't care. I don't care how big and tough you think you are. When they move on the trail, it makes you jump. It really does make you jump. It does me anyway.
Yeah. I admit I don't like being startled by snakes.
No.
I like to see them from a distance first.
Yeah.
But the first big view that I got at White Rocks Trail, that made me feel like, okay, now I'm really on the AT. I got a big AT view.
It's kind of important, isn't it, to get that moment where you feel, this is it. This is what I came for.
Yes. Yeah, it brings tears to your eyes.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's I was actually, you're going to be in a show this week with our main guest is on this week, and he got emotional talking about Katahdin. He's a guy, he's nearly as old as me, and he's a guy who got emotional about going to Katahdin. This you'll find your emotions will definitely be heightened by being on this trail, and you'll see things that will bring you almost to tears, and to tears, in fact. And why not do it? Let's face it, if you're by yourself, you could scream out loud, can't you, if you particularly want to?
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
That's what you come for, to be in the moment, right?
Absolutely. So you're happy out there? You're enjoy. This is what you wanted it to be, or is it? Are any surprises so far?
The only surprise is like how much work it takes me to try to stay organized with a relatively small amount of things.
Yeah, but
I don't have my systems down yet.
Yeah. But that's okay. You'll get, that will happen. I had a pack in 2014 which had so many zips and that, and I knew exactly where everything was in the end. You'll know soon just by putting your hand in exactly where to go in your bag. You work all that out. But that's all part of getting on a trail anyway, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I didn't realize that my pack would feel different every day.
Oh, really?
One day it feels pretty good, and the next day it feels like, I must have differently because it's not feeling good today.
Oh.
So I think I'm pretty sensitive to the balance of the pack and how it rides.
Do you find that you have to adjust it most days? Because I tended to, certainly for the first, 2 months, I think it was, because I was losing weight as well dramatically. But I kept having to adjust my pack pretty much every day when I set out, just to make sure it did balance right. So I just check the setup every day and just make sure you're comfortable with it, and then you should be able to go with it.
Yeah, that goes with getting your systems down and having a place for everything, right?
That's right. Yeah, and you'll find
It'll come.
Yeah,
It'll
you'll find a place for everything. Well, look, you sound happy, which is a good thing. I mean, some people we've spoken to over the years haven't been happy with those first days. The fact that you've started in good weather is pretty cool. You haven't had to cope with the real freezing weather, but you've now got the other extreme, the 80s, and you will get the 90s probably as well, and the high humidity. But keep going.
Sure.
Good to catch up with you, and just contact me in a couple of weeks' time, if things happen, just text me, and we can plan when to jump online then as well to chat. Okay.
Sounds like a plan.
Lovely. Well, keep going, and happy hiking. All right.
Will do. Thanks, Steve. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Woman who likes snakes. I met one of those in 2014, Stacey Bucklin. She was actually an early guest on the podcast. Stacey would pick them up and invite them to bite her. Spooky. Still, Jessica is starting to find her feet out there. That early section out of Harper's is a pretty sweet early start, so I'm sure people will enjoy the flip from there. We'll catch up with her again when she's got a few more miles under her belt. Finally today, George Stefanos is finding his feet again back on the trail after his break at home. This week he spends some time at one of my favourite stops on the AT, the Graymore Monastery. Happy memories. I'll see you next week. Monday the 8th of August, 1983, mile 1367.3. The little hollow in which I pitched my tent screened me from most of the traffic noises of the nearby roadway. Nevertheless, I apparently grew too accustomed to sleeping on a bed in an air-conditioned room during those 5 days home. I had great difficulty in falling asleep last night and couldn't manage to remain asleep on those occasions when I did nod off. As usually happens at such times, I dropped off very nicely just when it was almost time to wake up. It was past 8:30 by the time I hit the trail this morning. Thanks to my recent loss of conditioning, that made reaching Graymore Monastery by 4 o'clock a very difficult proposition. As the day went on, the prospects became steadily bleaker. The first climb was a bear, even when compared to the rest of the trail in this park. By the time I reached the ridge crest, I was exhausted, and I had only come little more than a mile. It was depressing. I had the idea in the back of my mind that 1 or 2 days of hiking would restore all the conditioning lost in those few days at home. This expectation was somewhat over-optimistic. Fortunately, West Mountain had a lot going for it. The views from up top were the best in the park to that point, and a nice breeze rapidly dried out my sweat-soaked clothes. I needed that breeze. One of the worst aspects of these steep climbs is the way the mountain walls block every wisp of air unless it is coming from right behind me, which of course it never does this summer. I shot many pictures on that summit, partially because of the great views and partially because my light meter was on the fritz, and I was forced to bracket my exposures. I think my camera needs new batteries. The climb down the other side of West Mountain was almost as bad as the climb up. On such trails, I became just as tired and sweaty and moved just about as slow on the downhills as on the ascents. It was a relief to cross Seven Lakes Drive and begin the climb up Bear Mountain, simply because I knew it was the last mountain the Appalachian Trail passed over in the state park. Happily, this climb turned out to be the best one. The few steep sections were short and sweet. Bear Mountain is the highest mountain in Harriman State Park. The summit is 1,284 feet above sea level. The view is impressive because the mountain rises directly adjacent to the Hudson River, which at this point is only a few feet above sea level. On top of the summit stands a monument. The summit, the views and the monument can be reached by an auto road. As a result, a lot of cars and a lot of people were up there when I arrived. I took a quick 10-minute break and got started again, even though I was dead tired. The clock was ruthlessly working against me. I was still trying to get my act back together on my 3rd day back on the trail. My last-ditch effort to make it to Graymore by 4 o'clock had begun on the 1.5-mile climb up Bear Mountain, which I forced myself to do without stopping for any rests, a major undertaking at this point. A water fountain stood near the monument on the summit. I filled my canteen and took a drink. The water was not very cold and had a bitter flavour, but it tasted fine to me after that long, hot climb. By the time I headed down the mountain, reaching Graymore by 4 o'clock had become next to impossible. I would need to average 2 miles per hour over the remaining 7.5 miles. Before my 5 days at home, no problem. Why I've been hiking since I've returned? No way. But I had to try. The trail down Bear Mountain was far worse than the trail up. The footway was steep and badly eroded, and the path was covered with dangerously loose rocks. It was a discouraging scramble coming at a point where time had become such a pressing concern. Eventually, the descent came to an end. Once again, the central states of the Appalachian Trail played games with my head. I emerged from the woods onto some paved paths, skirting a large body of water called Hessian Lake. Dozens of rowboats were out on the lake, which was surrounded by beaches with hordes of people. I passed park benches also swarming with humanity. Most of them seemed to be staring at me, wondering what the hell I was doing walking through that park with a backpack on. I didn't do much to reassure them. I could see that most of them thought I was a psycho, and that had me constantly breaking out in fits of laughter, which no doubt convinced them. I don't care. I was having fun. I was in a New York state of mind. Hey, tourist boy, you looking at me? The trail grew even weirder. It passed under New York Route 9W through a tunnel, a concept which seemed so totally New York that it was perfect. I emerged from the tunnel at a snack bar next to a huge swimming pool filled with screaming kids. I just cannot get enough of these wilderness experiences. I bought a 20-ounce Coke at the snack bar for $1.25, but passed up the $2 burgers. I drank the Coke as I walked. I didn't have time to take any breaks. After the pool, the Appalachian Trail followed concrete paths through a nature zoo. I finally saw my first black bear on the Appalachian Trail. 3 of them, as a matter of fact. I also saw a red fox and 2 bobcats, none of which I had yet seen on the trail either. The fact that they were in cages detracted a little from the thrill of the experience, but at least I have a true story with which to impress people. There I was, hiking along the Appalachian Trail, when suddenly I was face to face with a full-grown black bear, not 10 feet away. No, I wasn't afraid. The zoo was also packed with people who were gawking at me. I just smiled and laughed at them as I walked along. What the hell? I might as well make their experiences truly memorable. It was an experience I myself will never forget. I finally reached the pedestrian walkway of the Bear Mountain Bridge on which the Appalachian Trail crossed the Hudson River. It was not quite as huge as the Hudson River bridges farther south near the city, but it was still an impressive half-mile in length. As I was walking across, I saw a kid in the back seat of a passing car taking my picture. I smiled and waved, trying to look deranged, but it was no huge stretch for me at that point. I can just imagine the slideshow when they get back home to Kansas. By the time I reached the other end of the bridge, all the attention was beginning to wear a little thin. It was a relief to finally follow the Appalachian Trail back into the woods, but that feeling of relief was tempered by yet another sick climb. I just put my head down and bulled up that incline, finally reaching a level area after much steep climbing. I had to take my 10-minute break there, needing the rest more for psychological reasons than physical, for what, to my tired eyes, did appear but another rock climb, the steepest of all, just when I thought it was safe to go back into the woods. I saw it, and my mind said, break time. I'd hiked the preceding 4 miles without stopping in 1.5 hours. I now possessed a half-hour cushion with which to work in my attempt to reach the monastery. I stumbled to the top of the ridge, where the Appalachian Trail came out onto an old dirt road. Now I faced a dilemma. The views from a cliff called Anthony's Nose were reputed to be spectacular, but they were a 1-mile round trip off the Appalachian Trail. If I went for it, I would blow the entire cushion I had just worked so hard to acquire. Did I really want to push myself to the limit just as I was finally starting to find my good hiking pace again? I dropped my pack, grabbed my camera, and headed down the road towards Anthony's Nose. I did say earlier I wanted another finest hour after all. If my exposure bracketing worked and the pictures of Bear Mountain and the bridge come out, it was worth it. Even if they don't, I'm glad I didn't miss that vista. It was one of the best views since Shenandoah. Nevertheless, I needed to haul butt by the time I got back to the Appalachian Trail. It was 2:30 and I now had 1.5 hours in which to hike the final 3.5 miles. There was a great deal of relatively flat trail the rest of the way, and my need for speed today had done much to restore my lost hiking ambition. I was cranking along and would have covered those miles with time to spare, but it wasn't necessary. Graymore was closer than I expected. I thought it would be at the point where the Appalachian Trail crossed New York Route 9, but I passed it along a stretch where the trail paralleled the highway a 1/4 mile before the crossing. I arrived at Graymore at 3:50, thinking I was 10 minutes early. I climbed the long driveway up the hill to the place and found Crazy Charlie waiting on a bench outside. He had just been informed that the monastery doesn't accept hikers until 4:30. I was 40 minutes early. My all-day sprint had not really been necessary, but I didn't regret the experience. My layover had left me flabbier mentally than physically. Rediscovering a little grit and determination was the last great psychological hurdle between me and Katahdin. The 40 minutes of waiting passed pleasantly. I gulped down about a quart of cool water from a nearby water fountain and joined Charlie on the bench in the shade. As he was not spinning any of the usual tall stories about his imaginary exploits, we had an entertaining conversation. While we were waiting, another thru hiker showed up, a guy from New Jersey named Pete. He had recently resumed hiking after taking 8 days off from the trail, so he was in much the same condition as I. He seemed like a good guy, so maybe I'll have someone with which to hike for a while. At 4:30, a priest came out to greet us and showed us to the cells in which we would be sleeping tonight. I had time for a nice hot shower before we headed down to dinner at 5:15. The father who had shown us to our rooms was seated at our table. He was a likeable fellow with an engaging personality and tons of enthusiasm about everything, so he was fun to listen to. And we had a lot of fun because he talked about a mile a minute all meal long. He told us candidly that he had held down a very responsible position here until the pressure caused him to have a nervous breakdown. His superiors put him in charge of the backpackers who stay here in order to give him a stress-free job. We were curious about the reasons for the special kindness and generosity shown to backpackers by the monastery. For no charge, they provided us a room, they called them cells, with a bed for the night, shower and laundry facilities, dinner and breakfast. The father informed us that his order was formed in Europe during the Middle Ages with a special mission to aid travellers. Learning that the Appalachian Trail passed near their property here, it seemed like a logical extension of that original mission to do something special for the hikers. As candid as ever, he also told us that, in a day and age when so many people are turning away from religion, his order was desperately in need of new priests and monks. They were hoping to find a few possibilities in our ranks. All I can say is that they picked the right guy for the recruiting job. He was a man impossible not to like. Nobody minded the sales pitch. It was certainly a soft sell approach. Were I not agnostic, I may have even considered it. He mentioned his mission in passing and spent the rest of the meal asking us a million questions about our experiences. The meal itself was chicken, mashed potatoes and zucchini. It was very good, and the father kept encouraging us to eat all we wanted. We all laughed. Okay, twist our arms. 2 through hikers at the table were hiking south from Maine to Georgia. Southbounders must start much later than we northbounders because spring comes that much later to the higher latitudes of Maine and New Hampshire than it does to Georgia and North Carolina. Thus, these were the first 2 southbound through hikers I'd met, even though I was one of the later northbounders to leave Springer Mountain and was now almost 2/3 of the way to Katahdin. As usual, I was able to pick up a lot of information about the trail up ahead. It's now 9:15 and I'm back in my cell. I must be up early tomorrow in order to squeeze out a 19-mile day and reach another special place where I want to spend tomorrow night. Thanks to my strong effort this afternoon, I would say that I'm back up to about 85% of my physical condition before leaving the trail, so I feel confident. Graymoor is one of the quiet and unexpected highlights of the Appalachian Trail. All my clothes are now clean. The laundry facilities were right next to our bathroom, and the good people here provided detergent and even fabric softener sheets for the dryer. I need not worry about chafing my soft white butt hiking the trail tomorrow. The lean, mean mileage machine is once again ready to roll, 771.2 miles to go. By the way, Charlie and Pete were able to fill me in on the further adventures of Mark, the likeable scallywag with whom I hiked through Shenandoah National Park. While hiking with Mark, I had become aware that he carried a large pistol in his backpack. Apparently, before I met him, he used to sleep with it under his pillow. I do remember that he seemed rather paranoid about bears. Perhaps that was the reason. At any rate, somebody saw the gun and ratted him out at ATC headquarters in Harpers Ferry. They in turn notified the police, who are now looking for Mark. Some people have no sense of humour. Speaking of no sense of humour, of all the hikers that have met Mark, Crazy Charlie seems to be the only one besides myself who likes him. I wonder what that says about me.